it's my great pleasure to welcome today Rosalind Janssen, who's coming to us from Birkbeck College, and she is going to be giving a textile demonstration, and she's promised that the results of this demonstration are going to be surprising. So I'd like to welcome Ros now.
Good morning, everybody. I'd just like to check the sound level because I've got a loud voice and I don't want it to be too loud. Is it all right? Good. So welcome to the start of the textile technology part of today. What I'm going to be doing is a short PowerPoint presentation followed by a practical demonstration. I'm not going to be doing the demonstration myself. I'm going to be seeking 8 volunteers from the audience. So just to warn you. Could we have the lights down at the front, please, a little bit more? And you've got an indication from the top left that what I might be demonstrating, or you might be demonstrating, is a little bit on pleating in Egyptian textiles. If we look at depictions of what the ancient Egyptians wore, the impression we get from the tombs is that the linen was very pristine. So linen is the predominant fabric. It occurs in 5 specific grades, distinguished by the ancient Egyptians as ranging from royal linen up at the very top to ordinary linen at the bottom of the 5 grades. There's also an indication that Egyptian garments were elaborately pleated, although if you look at the tomb scenes, the idea of how they were actually worn and the draping and the tailoring is rather confusing. So the only way is to look at real garments to get an idea of construction. And here I've got an example, because obviously I couldn't bring the real item, made by my colleague and friend Janet Janssen, who's going to be speaking to you later. Here we have the Tarkhan dress in the Petrie Museum, which takes me right back because this was my introduction to the world of textiles, and it was the first article I published in 1979 on this child's dress. And here we've got the pleating of it. The original is with knife-edged pleating. Here Janet is showing you this reproduction with accordion pleating. So a question we have to ask is how the ancient Egyptians obtained these really fine pleats in the linen. And if we look at the tomb scenes, we've really got no idea of how it was done. So what we're going to do now is to attempt to combine looking at tomb scenes with some philological examples as well, to see if we get any closer to gaining an idea of textile pleating before we move into the demonstration. So what did royalty wear? How did it differ from what the ordinary people wore? So I've given you an idea of quality of linen. The insert shows a tapestry woven garment from the tomb of Ka at Deir el-Medina, which is now in Turin. This is his so-called winter tunic, and tapestry weaving is one of the grades of linen. So it's an additional grade which my husband and I actually managed to add to the original 4 grades of linen. So what we're going to do is look at the minutiae of washing in ancient Egypt. How was the laundry performed? Well, we're back to Beni Hassan again. So we saw a lot of tomb scenes in Beni Hassan later, and our German colleague asked us how reliable they were. Certainly for the washing, we do see definite procedures, which we know must have happened, but it's also what they don't tell us. So we don't have any examples of pleating going on at all. But you've got distinct stages. You've got washing in a canal. You've got the wringing here on a pole in the ground. You've got an overseer, that's absolutely clear. He's named above, the overseer of the laundrymen, who gathers up the linen after it's been stretched and laid on the bleaching ground and carries it away on his head to take it back to the households. Okay. You'll notice that it is an all-male concern. So laundrymen, until we get to the Ptolemaic period when we get our first women who act as laundry people. So there's an idea of the procedures, and each one is named above as to what is actually going on. But it's somewhat jumbled, and you can see that the scene immediately moves into carpentry. So we've obviously got to be careful where one ends and we've got the next activity. So texts. What do texts tell us about the life of the laundryman? If we go to the Middle Kingdom satire of the trades, poking fun at a whole host of professions, you'll see that the life of the laundryman is not to be recommended. You've got crocodiles nearby, and it's just an extremely unpleasant activity, so that at the end he weeps and he spends the day at the washing board. So here we have an indication of an artifact which was used, a washing board, but how to identify it archaeologically. So that's a very nice depiction, but how reliable it is, you have to take the whole text in context. So what do we know about the washing board? Well, here we've got an overseer of the laundry men from the tomb of Senbi at Mir, and he is carrying an object which is perhaps to be identified as a washing board, so his sort of mark of office. And you can see that there's a clear patterning at this end of it. And he is on a par with the sandal bearer. So here is the nomarch Senbi and his two chief men, sandal bearer and overseer of the laundry. Let's move on to the New Kingdom, and the vital information, of course, comes from the artisans' village of Deir el-Medina on the West Bank at Luxor. And here we get a very good idea of how the laundry operated in a desert village. And obviously it had to be a professional activity which was undertaken for the artisans by a distinct group of laundry men. So, of course, even today, the water has to be brought in to the village. The washing, then, must have taken place in a nearby canal, the Nile being really too far to carry the washing up and down. By the New Kingdom, we see that certain sophistications have entered the washing activity. What we've got now is the possibility of washing in tubs. So pottery containers, and this one here is placed in a cauldron which would have allowed for heating. So it's possible to soak the washing and then to have a warm wash as well. So it's obviously become more sophisticated. But we've got similar activities to what we saw before, the shaking of the wet washing and the stretching of it, and then laying it out again on the bleaching ground to dry, and the canal being shown here. And once again, an all-male concern. And you get a good idea of what what garments were worn for different activities. So the more dirty work, the less you wore. So loincloths, the basic undergarments, worn for the washing itself, but as they're progressing and laying out the garments, they're wearing kilts. So that's quite interesting to look at the detail. This is a much more positive view of the laundryman in one of the love poems, so to Ostraca in Cairo, which we can join to get this view of the advantages of being a laundryman. So I think we need to contrast that with the earlier satire of the trades. We also have from Deir Medina a series of inscribed laundry lists, which are invaluable for giving us an idea of what garments were washed, and we can even gauge how frequently they were washed. So if we sort of evaluate them as a whole, we learn that the ancient Egyptians were obviously extremely cleanly, also that they washed their undergarments more frequently than the overgarments. So it's possible to get to that stage of minutiae. So this piece here, I'm translating here, so this Ostracan, so written on a piece of potsherd, obviously in hieratic script, and this one is very nice because it is actually dated to regnal year 1 of King Seti I, so we could get a precise date for it. And it talks about the various garments which were given again to the washerman, and what's interesting for this text is that the garments were given to the washerman on the riverbank. So the individual households, in this case, actually had to deliver the garments to the laundrymen at their site of work. So it gives an idea perhaps of the status of the laundrymen, that sometimes they didn't even have to go to the individual houses at all. It was all brought to them on the riverbank, as it were. And just some totals of garments. Obviously, from the totals, we can see if the garments came from one individual house or if a group of people amalgamated to provide more garments. So totals are important. And there is also evidence as well for women's literacy if there are low totals in garments. So it's possible that the woman of the house would have written the list. The problem is, of course, identifying words and then the actual textiles themselves. So what I'm trying to indicate to you is the necessity to combine philology with archaeology and moving on to experimental archaeology. We've also got laundry lists compiled by illiterate workmen, women perhaps, of the households, and also laundrymen themselves. Okay? So drawings of individual garments, and the dots would presumably indicate the number sent or the number received. And certain items you can obviously identify. Here we've got the triangular loincloth, we've got perhaps a shawl, sashes, sheets, a lot of this object here, a very peculiar amoeba-like object, one of which, perhaps the skin, very difficult to identify, but that's a possibility. Now this garment here is the standard garment from the village, very similar to the modern galabeer. You could put into it detachable sleeves, which you would sew in and out at times of adverse cold. So a very simple garment, obviously known archaeologically because of the one that we saw in the Turin Museum belonging to Car. The last text that I'm going to show you from Medina again is important because it's indicating to us the sort of rights that these laundrymen had. So I've mentioned that the washing sometimes was actually delivered to them and not collected. Here we have the complaint of the writer to the scribe Amenemope, and basically what he's complaining about is that the laundrymen have got too much work, and they refer back to what their original allocation was. So they've got too much work, too many houses, and they want a reduction in the number of houses that they're going to serve. And the text continues by complaining that they haven't got enough soap. The soap used is natron, which you heard about yesterday from Salima, and you may still have the sample over there. So we know that natron was used for the washing process, the ancient Egyptian soap, and for linen it would enable you to really bleach the linen a pure white, and it would also get out the creases, because the biggest problem with linen is the fact that it creases dramatically as soon as you put it on. Here then we've got an appeal to the pharaoh to reinstitute the ration of soap. So in other words, they're saying they've got too much work and they've not got enough soap. So the laundrymen seem to be people with rights to complain, at least at Deir Medina. And they could get, as you can see, stroppy, basically. Here we move on to the subject of our demonstration. The early Egyptologist Sir John Gardner Wilkinson, in his Manners and Customs of Ancient Egypt, written in the 1840s, refers to certain objects as pleating boards, one of which is the object shown on the right-hand side here, which is now in the British Museum. And this is what it looks like. What I've done is to go to the various museums, take precise measurements, and then have one-to-one replicas made of these various boards. So this is the one in the British Museum, and it has 2 holes here and 2 holes here, okay? And it's completely flat on the underside. Wilkinson also talks about 2 boards in Turin, and these are the examples here. They're very different because this one is much more undulating, and this one is far sharper, okay? And again, this one is still on display in Turin because I was there a couple of weeks ago. And the final example that he cites is very different. This one is in Florence. Okay. So very undulating here. A sort of handle to it, a bit like a cricket bat, like that. Again, it's an absolutely one-to-one replica. So these are the boards that we're going to use for the experiment. So we're now moving to the practical. Right. Now, at this stage, I'm calling for 8 volunteers. And just to set your minds at rest, I've forestalled the possibility that nobody would volunteer. So the students are all organised, and I should have 8 laundrymen, women, to step forward. We also have an overseer appointed, and the overseer is Jane. Is she here, Jane? Can we have the lights on, Ken, please, at the front? So if you come up to where your stones are. So do we have 8 people?
I think I'm 1 short.
We're 1 short, so I do need an audience volunteer.
Oh no, it's okay.
You got one.
Okay, fine. What we have here are 4 pieces of linen, which are of various qualities, actually dating back to the Second World War, gift of a previous student. So obviously this is second grade linen, I would say, and these would be our grade 4, perhaps. Okay, so what I'm going to do is give one group each one of these, and what they're going to do is to attempt to pleat using these boards. Now, I know from experience that you have to wet the linen, okay, because it's not going to work otherwise. But they've got to be very careful to get it just right, not overspray it. So I see we have a token laundryman. So this is turning into Ptolemaic linen pleating. So, ladies and gentlemen, do not overspray this, okay, otherwise it will go wrong. So they will spray it, and then they will attempt to pleat by pressing it into their particular board. When they've done that, they will take another bit of the linen and just try and pinch it using the fingers, okay? So you need to keep 1/2 of it for your board and 1 for pinching it. When they've finished, they're going to weight it with stones from the mumbles. Thank you, Reg, for walking along the beach and getting these stones. We're then going to look at the end result. Jane is our overseer of the laundry women and men, and she's going to wander around and look at what they're doing, and then she's going to give a bit of feedback. Okay, I believe in using one's students. So she's going to see how it actually went and how each group progressed. I'm now going to distribute the boards at random. There's no choice here. Okay, so start.
Looked at Indian washing or Pakistani, because what we do, you know that stick that you saw, we use that for the pleating.
The beating?
Pleating.
Okay. Pleating, okay.
Yeah, I'll show you later.
Okay, fine, yeah. So Jane, move around and have a look. Yeah, be bossy, yes. You're in charge.
Well, I think it's, yeah, experiment. It needs to be a bit flexible.
Yeah, not too wet. So you're trying to pinch it in, okay? You're actually using your fingers to pinch it into these grooves. Oh gosh, look at this.
Oh no.
They have made a hole in the linen.
You're fired.
They are fired, yes. No.
few different techniques.
Yes. Okay, now really pinch it in, and then you've got to bunch it up when you take it off. So they're discovering they've got to use their fingers a lot at the same time. It's no good just relying on the boards to do the work. Yes? Yeah, they're asking, Reg is asking me, what is there in the linen that has the property to respond? Janet, you might be able to answer it. Yeah. Yeah. The point is, laundrymen, can you quieten down a little bit?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Less talking, more working.
Yes, overseer, get onto it. What we've got to ask ourselves is how the pleats were kept in, as it were. Did the ancient Egyptians use a sizing? Janet's experiments show that boiling up flax seeds creates an ideal sizing to hold in the pleats. Okay, so that is a possibility. Obviously, we're doing it here very quickly, and the waiting under the stones is going to be a short process. How are they getting on?
This team's got quite
Yeah, so this team has worked very quickly. They're now at the stage where they are bunching up their pleats, about to wait. Are they using the stones yet?
They are for the
Yes.
boards.
Okay. So if you don't like it, you need to take it up and pinch it in and then weight it, and then do your bit of hand pleating. Are there any more questions while the laundry people are at work? Yes? No, and that's a good point. So when we come to evaluate it, the question is, are the laundry boards found in pairs? And you've got the vital question. But we'll have an evaluation at the end when we see what they managed to produce. Dennis?
Okay, well,
Exactly, so very narrow. Working at speed, and you can see that this group have been speedy, and working in pairs, it would be possible to build up a momentum in doing this. But the ultimate question we're going to ask ourselves is, are these pleating boards? How many function as, can work as pleating boards, or do we need another interpretation? And we'll see when they've finished. Jane, speed them up.
Yeah, come on.
And the hand pleating. Have you done your hand pleating? You need to take this off as well and put it on a stone. Any more questions at this stage?
You seem using the linen from World War II.
Yes.
With the production actually of the linen, when the growing stage and the crop and things like that, did that affect, because now we're going back to organic fibres, and I find that they're softer than our.
Okay, so there's a question about the date of the linen, which I've told you is Second World War era, and quality of linen as well. Certainly the quality of linen in ancient Egypt was based on when the flax plant was actually harvested. So the longer the maturity, the colour more yellow and more brittle as well. Okay, so they've all finished. Each group has finished. Have they all done their hand pleating?
Yes, they have.
Fine, okay. You've got to imagine that this waiting under the stones has been going on for a lot longer than you see it here. What we're going to do is to look at what each group has produced. Jane will give us her feedback as to how she felt that group operated, and we might have a few words from the laundrymen themselves. So we'll start here. So this is the Turin board with the very noticeable grooves. Take your work off the stones and show us. So which bit was on the board? Yeah. Okay. And that was their hand pleating. Right, Jane, how did you feel it went?
Really well. They worked quite quickly and well as a team. They also wet theirs a lot more than these two. These four wet their linen a lot more than these four, so whether or not that's going to have an effect. But no, they were very quick. They sort of worked it out quite quickly and that, so very good.
Give you the money later.
And how did you feel it worked using this board?
We actually thought it was easier doing it by hand, I think.
Yeah, so they felt it was easier doing it by hand. Okay. Next group, I'm going to go to the one at the end because it's the second Turin board. Remember, remarkably different from the one we've just seen with the very sharp grooves. Right, show us what you've done.
So this is the hand pleating and this is the board pleating.
Yeah. Again, would you feel that the hand pleating was more easier? Yeah, and more successful as well.
Well, first of all, we didn't know we had to take it off the board.
Okay.
But once we figured that out.
Okay, any more that you noticed about this group, Joan?
They did have to take a lot longer sort of pinching it and trying to get the initial pleats in
Yes.
anyway. And they didn't use as much water as they did that table, so whether or not that's had an effect, I don't know.
Okay, fine. Any more comments from the team?
I'm not sure how well it's going to work just because it's very flat. It's quite flat.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is so different in structure. Okay, fine. We'll now go to the British Museum team. This one here. Oh. Comments, Joan?
We're just looking at, I think the board pleating looks more
Yeah.
defined than the hand pleating.
Yes.
They spent a long time doing the board pleating, I think, as opposed to the hand pleating. I don't think they spent as much time with the hand pleating.
Mm-hmm.
But again, they used a lot of water.
Yeah. How did you find it?
It was quite hard, like, because the board is so small.
Mm.
So it was quite difficult to expand the tiny.
Yeah, so they're commenting on how tiny it is, how small the grooves are. It sort of vaguely worked, hasn't it, but not over much. Okay. Right. And then we move on to the last group, which is the very peculiar Florence board. This one here. A lot chunkier and easier to get to grips with. Okay, just tell us which is which in case we don't know.
That's the board.
Yeah. Yeah. So the hand pleating went very well, didn't it?
Actually, I think you didn't spend as much time probably as everybody else on the hand pleating. Because you were,
Yeah, they struggled with the board, they're saying.
It's too wide. It's really hard to scoop it out.
Yeah. Yeah, so cumbersome, too big, problematic. Okay. Any more you want to say? Any more you want to say, Jane, on this one?
I think, again, you didn't use as much water, but you were wetting the pleats as you went along, weren't you?
Okay.
A lot of those group, you wetted the linen first quite a lot and then started the pleating, whereas this group,
Yeah.
then used the water.
Yeah, some of it is, perhaps stages of when you use the water, and obviously, as I've explained, the quantity of the water. But the overall conclusion would seem to be that using these boards has not been highly successful. So what does that imply to our laundry people here?
I was wondering if this might be more of a stylistic exercise rather than a
Yes.
different shapings, perhaps.
Or do we have to look for completely new interpretations of these objects? Was Wilkinson actually not correct at all? Okay.
You know what they would remind me of is the Acme washboard. The scrubbing.
Yes, yes. So is this possibly to be identified as a washboard or a completely different interpretation?
Because whereas the long one would work as a washboard,
Yeah.
the smaller ones wouldn't.
Yeah. So let's take this smaller one here and perhaps come up with a completely different interpretation of it. Any Egyptian objects you know that might incorporate a feature that looks like this? Completely different type of object. We don't know the provenance at all. If we knew that, it would be perhaps a lot easier. Let's go back to our boats of yesterday.
For measuring as well, too. They were very useful, and I've noticed
Yeah.
patterns, the regularity using the board. It's a little more even than the folding.
Yes.
It didn't hold in every case.
So possibly for measuring, we've got an interpretation here. There are some modern examples shaped like this for sorting pills, would you believe? This one, I see possibilities that it's from a model boat, gangplank. Well, no, I've seen parallels. I have seen parallels. But it just shows us that we shouldn't be too rigid in our interpretations at all, because these objects, can be completely erroneously placed as pleating boards. The lady who talks about the pairs, that is very logical. So if they acted as pleating boards, we would expect to see a pair and obviously the weighting. In other words, the conclusion of this experiment is probably that these are not pleating boards at all. I hate to disappoint you, but you'll see in the next talk what I really feel, that the ancient Egyptians were able to do natural pleating, and we've obviously here proved that pinch pleating by hand is actually far more successful. Okay. Salima, you had a comment as well.
I'd like to try it first, but if you look at how we do in Pakistan and India, with cotton saris and other dupattas, sometimes we have very fine pleats, but it's you hand pleated it, but also we use a stick, and you put it around the stick when you do that. I can show you with your scarf.
Yeah. So Salima is talking about in India, Pakistan, pleating saris, hand pleating, and then using a stick. So, yeah. But Beni Hassan is definitely a ringing motion, and we've got a parallel in the tomb of Khnum-Hotep, which shows a much longer stick. So it's evident that the perspective is wrong there, because it looks as if it's a short stick sort of coming out of the canal, but it is a much longer post.
It's actually done when the thing is wet.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay.
That's where
Yeah,
it's
right,
just
okay.
very fine woven things.
Yeah, yeah. There's also a possibility that you could use maybe this one as a gauge. So you'll pinch pleating by hand, but you're also using this just at intervals as a sort of gauge.
If the fabric stretches, if you've got a wide piece, then
Yeah, it's going to be obviously more problematic. The conclusion then is that this experiment has raised more questions probably than answers, but interesting to try it because often these very early Egyptologists knew much more about technology and have been proved right in numerous cases. Wilkinson also talks about ironing as well and believes that the ancient Egyptians were able to iron linen, so that would be another experiment. So it just shows that you obviously have to try it with interesting results, surprising results, and how artifacts are always open to a myriad of interpretations. Also, the necessity of combining all the different aspects to get a holistic picture, certainly by combining philology, activity, and representations. So, I've finished early, which means we could get an early coffee break. Yeah. Yeah.
you pointed out the washing boards with the head washer.
Yes, near.
And that doesn't seem to have any grooves.
No,
Any
it's...
suggestions what that could be then?
It could be a beating board, but the only indentations were obviously at the very top of it. But I've never found an actual wooden artifact that ties up with it. But it's showing us how important it is there are so many objects of unidentified wooden objects. I remember at the Petrie Museum there were about 4 cupboards when I worked there just saying unidentified wood, and the necessity to tie these up to real artifacts. Yes?
So these boards, were they made of the same wood?
Yes, they're all local timber.
Yeah.
Yes, so they're all tamarisk. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting, the holes. Who's got the British Museum one? Which implies some kind of strap. Who knows, but obviously meant to be suspended. So looking at all the minutiae of these objects as well may bring us closer to an interpretation. So I'd like to thank my laundry people and also the head laundry lady. I won't ask her to carry away all the laundry on her head and redistribute it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Before we start the next lecture also, already generated by the presentation, Piers Paul Kriesman is going to briefly suggest some ideas that some of these may have been used for to do, well, I'll let him go.
So I would just generally agree. I've recently been making I've recently been making a study of the things that are associated with boat models, and this is almost stereotypically a gangplank. So, good on you. And then,
Gangplank or a brow?
beg your pardon?
You mean a gangplank or a brow?
Either or. Typically, if you were going to use this for
Gangplank horizontal, those
either or. Typically, if you were going to use it for loading, it would have a more triangular section. Yeah, it'd look more like this. But at this time, if you have warfare and needed to move from one ship to another or something like that, this would not be unreasonable. There are pieces like this associated. They're generally very flat with a couple of ripples with some of the boat models. So all I know, and it's difficult to say exactly how they worked. But and when I was in Turkey 4 or 5 years ago in a traditional shipyard, and I saw some fellas weaving rope together, and they put their foot down on a board, not exactly like this, but similar, and laced the ropes through. And it wasn't, for weaving cables, it wasn't this long. It was perhaps about this long. But this would also be useful if you were trying to keep lines straight to run through a brailed sail or something along those lines. So, possibilities. I have no idea. I've never seen anything like that in relation to ancient ships, though.